It was early in the morning when someone called emergency services. The call lasted about 8 seconds. Nobody said anything, but you could hear a moan in the background. And then the call dropped. Emergency services tried to call back, but it was only about 15 minutes later that a second call came in. And this time, there was someone on the other end asking for help. The police went there, and what they found inside that house that morning almost seemed to have an easy, simple explanation. But those 8 seconds from the first call and all that time of silence between one call and the next would destroy the whole story they tried to tell. I'm Marcos Campos, and this story involves an American federal agent, a Brazilian nanny, a fetish website, and 2 murders in a suburban house. While a 4-year-old child was playing in the basement, not knowing what was happening upstairs, this is one of the most disturbing and elaborate cases I've ever presented. Because the plan these 2 people came up with to get rid of one and use the other as a scapegoat is the kind of thing that seems like fiction, but it actually happened. So let's go through all of this in detail, do the usual engagement routine, and get to the facts. Tomorrow. On the morning of February 24, 2023, police officers from Fairfax County, Virginia, a suburban area about 40 kilometers from Washington, more or less, they arrived at a house in Herndon, Reston, responding to that second emergency call. The house was on a tree-lined, quiet street, one of those totally American neighborhoods, you know, where everyone has a lawn in front of their house. A big pickup truck in the garage, nothing there suggested alarm or violence. The front door of that house was unlocked. The police officers went upstairs and found the couple's bedroom, and what they saw in there changed the whole case. A 37-year-old woman was lying on the bed, covered in blood. She had been stabbed several times, mainly in the neck. A man was kneeling beside her with his hands pressing on her neck, trying to stop the bleeding. It was her husband. He looked at the police officers and said he had shot a guy who was attacking his wife. The guy he said he shot was lying in the corner of the room on top of a dog bed. The guy was lifeless. He had been shot in the head and chest. This man was 39 years old and had a knife next to him. In the basement of the house, the police found a 4-year-old girl, the couple's daughter, unharmed and alone down there. And there, outside, at the entrance to the gated community, there was a young woman, the family's nanny, a 22-year-old Brazilian. She was out of breath, visibly shaken by everything, and she told the police what had supposedly happened. The story that the husband and the nanny told that morning was as follows. The nanny had left the house with the couple's daughter to go to the zoo, but she came back because she forgot the snacks. When she came back, she saw a strange pickup truck parked in front of the house. She got scared and then called her boss, who had gone out to get breakfast at a McDonald's near the house. So he ran back, went into the house, and found a stranger attacking his wife with a knife in the bedroom. He drew his gun then, and since he was a federal agent, he carried a weapon. He shot the guy in self-defense. The nanny also fired a gun. Another gun that was in the house safe, can you believe it? Like I said, the guy died right there. The wife was taken to the hospital and didn't make it. At this point in the story, you might say, case closed? Of course not, right? Are you experienced investigators? Certainly not. It looked like self-defense, the armed intruder, the husband who fought back to save his wife. Most of the neighbors who heard the story that morning must have thought how lucky he happened to be nearby, right? But the investigators noticed 2 things before even leaving that house. The front door was unlocked, with no sign of forced entry, no broken window, no mark of any break-in. If that guy was an intruder, someone opened the door for him, right? Basic investigative deduction. Second thing, that first call to emergency services, about 8 seconds, right? More or less. Around 7:47 in the morning, that call with someone moaning in the background. If the husband arrived, saw the scene, and reacted, then why did someone call emergency services about 15 minutes before the actual call for help? And why did they hang up that first call? To understand how those 2 people ended up in that house that morning, we need to go back about 2 years in time, okay? Christine Banfield was a pediatric ICU nurse. She worked at a local hospital taking care of critically ill children. She was 37 years old. Her husband is Brandon Banfield. He was a special agent for the IRS, which is the US equivalent of Brazil's federal tax agency. But he was in criminal investigation. To put it simply, he investigated financial fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and things like that. So he carried a gun, had tactical training, and knew how an investigation worked from the inside. And the two of them lived together in that house in Herndon, Reston with their 4-year-old daughter. In October 2021, like many middle-class American couples who work all day and need someone there to take care of their kids, they did the same. They hired an au pair, which is that exchange program, where a young person from another country comes to live with the family, takes care of the child, and in exchange gets housing, food, and a salary, you know? That's right, the au pair who came to live with them was a Brazilian. Her name was Juliana Perez Magalhães. She was 21 years old at the time, and she came from Brazil through the official au pair program of the United States. She took care of the couple's little daughter, lived in the back room, and was part of the family routine. Everything seemed to be in order, working very well until August 2022, when Brandon and Juliana, the au pair, started having an affair. He was 38 years old and she was 22 at that time. The relationship became more relaxed. In October 2022, during a trip they took together to New York, Brandon said something to Juliana that changed the course of everything here. He said he wanted to get rid of Christine, and here it's important to understand why he didn't just ask for a divorce. Brandon didn't want a divorce for 2 reasons. First, because he was a bad person. No. First, he would lose money, meaning that in a divorce there in Virginia, the couple's assets would be divided and Christine would get a considerable share. Second, because he was a jerk. No, he wanted full custody of his daughter, and in a divorce that would be hard to get. He wanted Juliana, he wanted his daughter, and he wanted the life he already had, just without Christine in the middle of it. I keep wondering how someone can have thoughts like that, share them with the woman he was seeing at the time because he still wasn't divorced, and have her buy into it. Bizarre. And then, instead of looking for a lawyer to get a divorce in a civilized way, Brandon, a federal agent trained in criminal investigation, started planning a murder. First, he thought about hiring someone to kill Christine, his wife, but he dismissed the idea. He thought it was too risky. He knew from professional experience that this kind of plan almost always goes wrong because it involves a third person who might talk. Well, doing it himself always works out perfectly, right? So then he had the brilliant idea to orchestrate the whole thing, to control everything. Of course, there's a lot of irony in some of these sentences, okay? The trap, The plan that Brandon came up with is maybe one of the coldest schemes I've ever seen in a murder case, okay? And for it to work, he needed something specific. A stranger, someone who could be used as a scapegoat, someone who would show up at the crime scene with a knife in their hand and that everyone would believe was the attacker. He needed a guy who would look guilty even while dead. And to find this guy, he used the internet, more specifically a site called Fat Life, which is a social network aimed at you guys. People who practice sexual fetishes. It's like an online community where people discuss and arrange consensual practices between adults, you know? It's not an illegal site, okay? And it works with profiles, messages, and forums, similar to any other social network, except it's 18 and over. So Brandon created a fake profile on that site, using Christine's name and information, without her knowing, obviously. The profile was called Anastasia9, and what he posted there was a specific ad, a married woman who wanted to fulfill a sexual fantasy involving a stranger. The scenario described in the ad was as follows. The man would enter the house, bring a knife and restraints with him, tie up the woman, and have sex with her by force. All supposedly consensual, a role play, just watch. And then someone replied, a 39-year-old guy named Joseph Ryan who lived in the Washington area. His profile on the site was Taco Supreme 7000. Joseph liked painting, martial arts, and taking care of abandoned animals, especially dogs. He lived with his grandmother and took care of her. He believed he was talking to a married woman who really wanted to fulfill a fantasy and hook up. For about a month, from January to February 2023, Brandon and Juliana kept talking to Joseph pretending to be Christine. The messages went back and forth, arranging the details of the steamy meetup, and the instructions they sent to Joseph were very specific. He was supposed to go to the house on an agreed morning, bring a knife and restraints, all that stuff, and not stop for anything during the roleplay, no matter how scared the woman seemed. Brandon was setting up a crime scene before the crime even happened. An unknown man showing up at the house with a knife, doing exactly what it would look like to any police officer who arrived later. An intruder committing a sexual assault, and Joseph had no idea he was walking to his own death. Seen this way, it appears to be a nearly perfect, well thought out plan. So what about the digital footprints, I ask you? Does he really think someone would die there in even a slightly strange scene like that, given that the woman was married? Wouldn't the guys check the electronic equipment? Wouldn't they see that those messages weren't there, right? Anyway, it's not clear. Maybe they really did arrange a second meeting. And in the middle of it all, it turned into a crime because the guy was a lunatic, a sexual predator. It could be, but, I don't know. What do you guys think? Leave me a comment. Do you think this crazy husband's plan made any sense? Was he doing well? Or was he setting himself up to get arrested? Well, in January 2023, a few weeks before the murder, Brandon, the husband, bought a new gun. So he took Juliana to practice shooting at a range in the area, in Ashburn. And she had never shot before, okay? And he taught her. The day was wonderful. The two of us practicing shooting. For what? For the big day. And it arrived. On the morning of February 24, 2023, Brandon's birthday, the plan was set in motion. He woke up very early, took Christine's cell phone, turned it off, and hid it in a drawer there. And he unlocked the front door of the house. Juliana left the house with the couple's little daughter. Brandon drove out and went to a McDonald's, and this McDonald's was just a few minutes away from their house. He stayed there, waiting, with his cell phone in his hand, monitoring everything. Christine was sleeping in the bedroom, having no idea what was going on. Around a little after 7 in the morning, it's not very clear in the sources, 7:20, 7:40, somewhere in that range, Joseph arrived by car and parked in front of the house. He had brought the knife and the restraints just like they had arranged on the fetish website, okay? Joseph is the guy. The scapegoat. He came in through the front door, it was unlocked, just like he had arranged with his wife, right? With the woman he was going to meet there, and he went upstairs to the bedroom. What happened inside that room in the following minutes is at the center of this whole case. Joseph entered the room where Christine was sleeping, and believing that everything was a consensual role play arranged with her, he started acting according to the instructions he had received. And Christine woke up to a stranger attacking her. A woman who was sleeping in her own bed, who didn't know anything, who hadn't arranged anything with anyone, woke up there with the guy on top of her, right? Juliana, who at that point was already outside the house with the child, called Brandon saying she saw Joseph's car arrive, all of that, like, oh my God, there's a strange car here, and so on. Brandon ran back from McDonald's. He and Juliana left the little girl in the basement and went upstairs to the bedroom. Christine shouted, "Brandon, he has a knife!" Joseph looked at them, scared, without even saying anything, and Brandon shot the guy in the head. Joseph fell right there. Christine asked Juliana to call emergency services, and then comes that detail about the seconds of that call, Juliana called emergency services at that moment, around 7:47 o'clock in the morning, but it was too early. Brandon wasn't finished yet, so she hung up. And it was a huge link in the chain, right? Because she hung up on his orders and then messed everything up, right? Brandon then took the knife that Joseph had brought with him and stabbed Christine several times in the neck. Juliana was in the room, saw Joseph still moving on the floor, went to Brandon's gun safe, grabbed a second gun, remember, and shot Joseph in the chest. The guy died right there. Christine was bleeding out on the bedroom floor. In the next few minutes, Brandon did the following. He dragged Joseph's body onto a dog bed that was there. He took Christine's blood and put it on Joseph to make it look like her blood had splattered on him during the attack. Man, can you believe this? He then placed the knife near the body, knelt down next to Christine, and put his hands on her neck as if he was trying to stop the bleeding, and told Juliana to make the second call. Man, this case is just too surreal, don't you guys think? That's why I called it one of the most elaborate things. One of the most elaborate, morbid, and bizarre cases I've ever covered, because you start picturing this scene and you wonder how someone manages to pull off something like this, man. Well, when the police got there, they saw exactly what he wanted to happen. That they'd see him, not as a killer husband, but as a desperate man trying to save his wife. An intruder dead on the floor with a knife next to him, a nanny in shock outside, and a child down in the basement. Christine died at the hospital. That same day, Brandon told everyone who asked the story of his self-defense story, and it was a legitimate one. In the following months, Brandon did something that caught the investigators' attention more than any forensic evidence. He and Juliana started dating openly. You already know, with your experience in criminal cases, that this is a huge red flag, right? Now imagine how that looked to the investigators, to the professionals. That's a massive red flag, guys. Well, she left the kids' back room and moved into the couple's bedroom. As they say around here, with a fresh corpse still in the coffin, the same room where Christine had been murdered. When the police searched the house months later, they found a framed photo of the two, Brandon and Juliana, on the nightstand next to the bed where Christine used to sleep. But what really brought down the self-defense story was the digital investigation, okay? That's right, the digital footprints. The police technicians dug into the computers and cell phones in the house, and they found the Anastasia 9 profile. Remember it from Fat Life? They tracked all the messages with Joseph and found out that the profile activity happened at times when Christine was working or sleeping, at times when Brandon and Juliana's devices showed they were together. The bloodstain patterns there, which were analyzed by the forensic team and everything, kind of suggested that the one who actually held the knife in that room was Brandon, not Joseph. The splatters, the marks on the mattress, the position of the wounds, everything pointed to him. In October 2023 then, 8 months after the murder, or rather the murders, the police arrested Juliana. She was accused of Joseph's death since she herself had admitted that she shot him. She stuck to Brandon's version for a while, but then in October 2024, something happened that changed this story a bit, with the conclusion of the blood pattern analysis pointing to her husband. The police arrested Brandon as well. He had already been indicted in September. And when Juliana saw that both of them were in jail, cornered, and that the evidence pointed to them, to him, she decided to tell the truth, kind of trying to get herself off the hook so things wouldn't get too tough for her. So she sat there with the prosecutors for 4 hours and spilled the beans. She told them everything. The case, the plan, the fake profile, the shooting practice, the minutes between the two calls, the blood Brandon put on Joseph, the framed photo, everything. In exchange for cooperation, she accepted a deal, confessed to being involved in Joseph's death with a lesser charge, involuntary manslaughter, and agreed to testify against Brandon at the trial. Brandon Banfield's trial took place in January 2026, 3 years after the murders. It lasted about 3 weeks. That's really crazy, isn't it? The guy goes astray, wants to kill his wife so he can be with his young mistress. And then, when everything falls apart, it's every man for himself. And he ends up getting ratted out by the mistress, who knows, for whatever reason, that he wanted to kill his wife to be with her. Man, it's just too bizarre. Well, Juliana took the witness stand and told everything, okay? This time to the jury. She recounted the start of the affair with Brandon, talks about eliminating Christine, creating the fake profile, messages via Joseph, buying the gun, training at the range, and what she witnessed that morning. Brandon shooting Joseph and stabbing his own wife. Brandon also took the witness stand, but he denied everything. He said he loved his wife despite having had extramarital affairs throughout the marriage. He clearly loved sleeping around. He also said that the affair with Juliana was just a fling and that he never planned to kill anyone. He called the accusations absurd and told his version of that morning. He said he got home, found Joseph attacking Christine, and shot him to save her life, his wife's, right? And he kept trying to stop the bleeding until he said that Christine, while agonizing, apologized to him and said she loved him. What a shameless jerk, man. That's such narcissistic behavior, right? A guy like that still has the nerve to mess around with his wife's corpse anyway. The prosecutor tore his testimony apart right away, though. She asked why he had never told that version to the police before. Not in any of the hearings, not in any statement, nowhere. He didn't have a convincing answer, right? This prosecutor also showed a letter that Brandon had sent, written to Juliana in jail after her arrest, a letter where he called her a heroine. The guy was in jail accused of killing his wife, writing a love letter to his lover saying she was a heroine, man. The jury took 9 hours, spread over 2 days, to reach a verdict. I don't even know why it took so long. Guilty on all charges. 2 counts of aggravated murder, use of a firearm in the commission of a crime, and also for putting his daughter at risk during all that time. On the day of Juliana's sentencing in February of 26, the judge looked at her and said that this was the most serious case of its kind she had ever seen in her career, and she gave the maximum sentence, 10 years in prison. The prosecution had recommended releasing her for time already served as part of the cooperation agreement, but the judge ignored the recommendation. She said that Juliana's actions were deliberate, selfish, and showed a total disregard for human life. She only deserved to remain in prison and reflect on her actions. Joseph's mother, Deidre, the mother of the guy who lost his life in this whole mess, also spoke in court. She said that her son was born 2 days before Christmas, and that since his death, she hasn't been able to take down the Christmas tree. The tree stays up all year, next to the urn with his ashes. She asked the judge to recognize that Joseph was more than just a piece in that plan, that he was a real person. That he liked to paint, practice martial arts, and take care of stray dogs. That he deserves dignity, and that he didn't deserve what happened to him, as if he were something or someone disposable. One of Joseph's aunts looked at Juliana and said that, although she acknowledges that Juliana told the truth in court, telling the truth doesn't erase the responsibility for what she did. Juliana spoke for 4 minutes, said that she got lost in a relationship and left her values behind, that she understood she was guilty, and that she hoped to be forgiven one day, just as she hoped to be able to forgive herself. Brandon will be sentenced on May 8, 2026. The sentence will probably be life in prison without the possibility of parole. And it's likely that this video has already aired, and I'll pin in the comments what the sentence was, what punishment he will have to serve. Those 8 seconds, the first call, the moans in the background, it was Joseph. He had already been shot. Juliana called emergency services, but it was too soon. Brandon hadn't finished his dirty plan yet. She hung up on his orders, and after a few minutes called again. While all this was happening, Christine was agonizing on the bed, and Joseph was bleeding on the floor. Brandon stabbed his wife, dragged Joseph's body, spread the blood, positioned the knife, and knelt beside his wife to look like a desperate husband. Christine Benfield was a pediatric ICU nurse. She spent her days saving children. She had a 4-year-old daughter who was playing in the basement while her mother was being murdered upstairs by her own father, her husband. And this woman's husband, the man who swore to protect her, spent months pretending to be her on the internet to lure a stranger to their house. And Joseph Ryan, the stranger, died thinking he was doing something a woman had asked for. He entered that house believing he was going to meet someone who wanted him there. What he found was an ambush set up by a federal agent who needed a body with a knife in its hand to justify his rotten character and the murder of his wife. And the person who took care of their daughter, the person they brought from another country to live in their house, was part of this whole story. Man, what a plan, ass. Comment here and tell me what you guys thought. I really appreciate your company. Ruivo sends a kiss. See you next episode.